So today's episode comes to you courtesy of Michael, who's been supporting this channel as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Michael, so again, Michael, thank you so much. And for the personalized deck tech, Michael actually chose a commander that is an Omega level commander. An Omega level commander is one that is incredibly powerful and a massive threat. And the Omega level commander that Michael chose is Jodah Archmage Eternal with a focus on Myojin Tribal. Now we'll talk about the Myojin here in just a little bit, but first let's go over the commander with Jodah. It's a 4/3 human wizard with flying that costs 1 blue, red, white. And he has, you may pay WUBRG rather than pay the mana cost for spells that you cast. So Jodah is essentially a 5-color commander that can help you save on massive spells. Rather than pay the actual mana cost of a spell, you can actually just pay 5 mana as long as that 5 mana is WUBRG. So by ramping and fixing your mana properly with this kind of a commander, you can cast a ton of massive spells throughout the game, which makes this a perfect commander for a Myojin tribal build. Because as you'll see, the Myojin themselves have quite the restrictive casting costs and they cost a ton each. That being said, again, with Jodah, we are getting a massive discount on them, just having to pay 5 mana in total for each of them. But speaking of the Myojin, with this Myojin tribal build, I decided to include all 10 of the Myojin, and yeah, there are actually only 10 in Magic so far, though 5 of them are older cards, and those are actually outside of my normal budget restrictions of every single card being less than $1, so I have made an exception for those 5 cards and those 5 cards alone. That being said, this deck is still very budget friendly, and yeah, every single card in it outside of those 5 Myojin are less than $1, and yes, that includes Jodah as well. And as I am going through the cards on this episode, I'm going to be breaking things down into different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And also, if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out the deck list link in the description below. And now with all of that said, let's jump into it. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, and with it we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, there's Font of Fertility, which is basically an enchantment version of Wayfarer's Bauble, but you just pay 1 and a green to sacrifice it to get that basic land. And speaking of which, Diligent Farmhand is basically the exact same thing, but it is a 1/1 creature. Moving on, another fantastic turn 1 play is Search for Tomorrow, which we can suspend 2 for a green and get a basic into play untapped. And then, of course, some fantastic turn 2 plays are Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn. Growth is going to get us a basic into play tapped, and Edge of Autumn does the exact same thing as long as we've got 4 or fewer lands, though we can actually cycle it away by sacrificing a land instead. And of course, also at 2 mana, we've got Steve. Sakura Tribe Elder is a 1/1 Snake Shaman that we can sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Speaking of creatures that can help us out, though, there's Springbloom Druid, which has, when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice a land and get 2 basics into play tapped. And then, essentially, an instant version of this is Roiling Regrowth that does the exact same thing. But an even better version of Roiling Regrowth is Harrow, which is going to make us sacrifice 1 land to get 2 into play untapped. And speaking of 2 lands, Cultivate's going to get us 1 basic into our hand and 1 into play tapped. Whereas Growth from the Ashes, if we kicked it, is actually going to get 2 basics into play untapped. And speaking of 2 basics, next up there's Migration Path, which is going to get us 2 basic lands into play tapped, or we can cycle it away for 2. Moving on, there's Verdant Mastery, which we can actually pay 2 less to actually cast this, and when we do, we search our library for 4 basic land cards and reveal them. We put 1 onto the battlefield, tapped our opponent's control, again if we paid that 3 and a green instead of the 5 and a green, and then we get 2 in the battlefield tapped under our control and the rest into our hand. But then also at 6 mana, there's Nissa's Renewal, which gets us 3 basics into play tapped, and we gain 7 life. Finally, we are actually running a few of the ultimatums in this deck, including Clarion Ultimatum. Now, ultimatums have an incredibly restrictive cost, but again, with our commander, instead of paying that, again with this one, like green, green, white, 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 blue, blue, we can just pay WUBRG and we can cast it. And Clarion Ultimatum itself says, choose 5 permanents you control. For each of those permanents, you may search your library for a card with the same name as that permanent, put those cards on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Now again, in a singleton format like Commander, this card can be pretty useless, except when it comes to actually helping us ramp in a 5-color deck like this one. Because again, if we've got a forest, swamp, island, mountain, and plains in play, well, we can go get one of each of those by casting this. So again, if we've got all those basics in play with our commander, this is basically, hey, yeah, pay 5 mana to ramp 5, which is fantastic. But now that we've talked about ramping and fixing our mana, it's time to talk about the stars of the show. And that, of course, would be the Myojin, like Myojin of Seeing Winds, Night's Reach, and Cleansing Fire. Again, these cards have incredibly restrictive casting cost and a very high converted mana cost at that. Myojin of Seeing Winds itself is 7 blue, so 10 mana in total. Again, including 3 pips for blue. So yeah, Jodah can help us cast this for just 5 mana instead, so that's basically split in half. Regardless, Seeing Winds is a 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, it comes to play with a Divinity counter on it if you played it from your hand. It has Indestructible as long as it's got that Divinity counter on it, and by removing that Divinity counter from it, you draw a card for each permanent you control. So the original 5 Myojin actually act in a similar way, so I'm not really going to read those first 2 lines each time, but yeah, that is an incredibly powerful ability. By removing that Divinity counter from it, you can draw an absurd amount of cards. And of course, we'll talk about some ways here in a bit where you can do this more than once. Regardless, next up there's Myojin of Night's Reach, which also comes to play with that Divinity counter on it, and by removing it, it says each opponent discards their hand. That is an incredibly brutal effect, and your opponents are going to be in big trouble when you do that. It's going to be really hard for them to ever stop you once you get this in play. Especially, again, if you've got ways to actually do this more than once. Speaking of which, next up there's Myojin of Cleansing Fire, which says, remove a Divinity counter from it, destroy each other creature. Again, all of your other Myojins, if they're in play, are indestructible as long as they've got those counters on them, and this is going to wipe out every other creature on the board, so your opponents aren't going to be so lucky. Their armies are going to get wiped out, and yours is going to be fine. Well, again, the important part of your army with the Myojin. Sorry, Jodah. Although there are ways to save Jodah too, but we'll talk about that here in a bit. Before we do that, though, let's get on to the other Myojin with Myojin of Infinite Rage, Myojin of Life's Web, and Myojin of Towering Might. Infinite Rage has remove a Divinity counter from it, destroy all lands. Now, mass land destruction is something that is frowned upon in many commander groups out there. That being said, yeah, it's a Myojin tribal deck, so we're including it, and you don't have to activate this. But if your group is okay with it, obviously, go for it, when it's the right opportunity to do so. Moving on, though, there's Myojin of Life's Web, an 8/8 that has remove a Divinity counter from it, put any number of creature cards from your hand into play. Now, keep in mind, yes, this can be a fantastic ability, but that being said, do not do this with your Myojins. Or at least I should say, it's not going to play out any way that you want to in many circumstances if you do that. Because again, your Myojins do have that ETB to get that counter, but only if they are actually cast from your hand. Whereas, this Myojin of Life's Web is just helping you cheat them into play and you're not actually casting them. So please keep that in mind. Regardless, next up we've got the other green Myojin, which also is an 8/8 with Towering Might. Now, these newer Myojins are actually slightly different, so we're going to actually read that first line of text. It enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it if you cast it from your hand. So instead of it actually being, a Divinity counter and just, saying it's indestructible if it's got one of those, that doesn't matter. It's just an indestructibility counter, which will make a difference here in a bit. We'll talk about why. At least for one very specific card. Regardless, it acts in a very similar way to the other ones, essentially, where again, hey, I've got that counter, my creature's indestructible, and if I remove that counter, something happens. And in this case, it says, remove an indestructible counter from Myojin of Towering Might, distribute 8+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control that gain trample until end of turn. This can turn one of your creatures into a massively heavy hitter, or again, you can spread them out as much as you want to, but yeah, I mean, even just considering Jodah, being again a 4/3 flyer, let's just put 7 counters on Jodah, maybe 1 on something else, maybe just on this even. And now Jodah is a 2-shot KO. Moving on, though, next up we've got Myojin of Grim Betrayal, Myojin of Blooming Dawn, and Myojin of Roaring Blades. Again, like Towering Might and like the other Myojins, they're going to be getting those indestructibility counters on them when they enter the battlefield if they were cast from your hand. Grim Betrayal has removed the indestructibility counter from it, put onto the battlefield under your control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from anywhere this turn. This is a fantastic ability and one that can be incredibly game-ending. I mean, again, just even consider the combination of Cleansing Fire and this one. Just destroy all of your opponent's creatures and then get them all back into play under your control. And of course, we've got some board wipes that can help with that as well. Next up, though, there's Blooming Dawn, which has remove an indestructibility counter from it, create a 1/1 color spirit creature token for each permanent you control. This can get really out of hand, again, especially when you've got ways to do this more than once, because you're basically doubling that number, then quadrupling it, and yeah, it just gets really absurd. And also keep in mind the combination of this one and Seeing Winds. Yeah, just make a ton of permanents and then draw an absurd amount of cards from that. Next up, though, there's Roaring Blades, which has remove an indestructibility counter from it. It deals 7 damage to each of up to 3 targets. So this can dish out a ton of pain and actually can be a fantastic win condition when used with the last Myojin. And that Myojin is actually the golden pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the golden pig for this deck is Myojin of Cryptic Dreams. It's a 3/3 spirit that costs 5 blue, blue, blue that it enters the battlefield with an indestructibility counter on it if you cast it from your hand, and by removing an indestructibility counter from it, you copy target permanent spell you control 3 times. And of course, it's got some reminder text. The copies become tokens. So this is an incredibly powerful and even broken ability. Now, like I mentioned before, being able to activate an ability, especially one like this one more than once, can be an incredibly powerful thing. And again, with this one, it is the most broken of them all because, well, we can go infinite with this pretty easily. Essentially what I'm saying is with this, we can actually make an infinite number of copies of certain kinds of permanents when they come into play. And when we do, well, we've got plenty of ways to win from there, of course, and other fun, really exciting things happen as well. So yeah, with an ability as busted as this one, it is definitely the golden pig of this deck. And to illustrate just exactly how powerful this is, well, let's talk about the cards that this combos with. And that would be with cards that deal with proliferating. Now, I will say that you do need to have 2 of those counters on Myojin of Cryptic Dreams to actually get this combo going, but once you've got that second counter on it, it combos with cards like Watley's Raptor, Pollen Bright Druid, and Bloomhulk. Each of which are different, but essentially the exact same for our purposes. When they enter the battlefield, we proliferate. Well, actually, Pollen Bright Druid has choose 1, put a +1 counter on target creature, or proliferate, so technically this one is slightly better, and actually, well, it can, be infinite in a different way, but really quick before we get into that, let's just talk about the actual combo with Cryptic Dreams. Again, let's say that we've already proliferated with something. We've got 2 of those indestructibility counters on Cryptic Dreams. We then cast Watley's Raptor from our hand, and then we say, okay, I'll remove one of my counters from Myojin of Cryptic Dreams, and I'm going to copy Watley's Raptor 3 times. That ability is going to resolve. We get the 3 copies, and therefore we get 3 ETBs from those Watley Raptor copies, and they're each going to have us proliferate. And again, proliferating means choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. So of course, with our Myojin of Cryptic Dreams, we say, oh, you've got an indestructibility counter on you still? Awesome, let's give you another one. So we get to do that 3 times. While of course, Watley's Raptor, the original, is still on the stack, so then we say, okay, let's make some more token copies. And you keep doing this again and again and again, essentially an infinite number of times. And again, yes, I know rules lawyers out there, you can't really technically go infinite, so okay, 5 trillion, you've got to pick a number, so 5 trillion, okay? So not only do we have trillions of Watley's Raptors in play, but we also have trillions of indestructibility counters on Cryptic Dreams, and of course, if we have any other Myojin in play and they've got counters on them, infinite number of counters on them as well. So with something like Seeing Winds, you probably want to actually activate that one, before you go completely nuclear with, those Watley's Raptors. So you can draw, however many cards you need to essentially and not mill yourself. But with Knight's Reach, yeah, that's an infinite amount of times you can essentially make your opponents discard their hand, so they're never going to have a hand. Cleansing Fire can just be a board wipe and keep wiping opponents' boards whenever you need to. Infinite Rage, again, for certain playgroups that are okay with, destroying lands. Yeah, blow up all the lands, all the time. No one can ever have lands again. Life's Web can help you cheat in all of your creatures. I mean, it already basically could do that, but it can do it again if you draw cards. Regardless, Towering Might can make your creatures infinitely large and give them trample. Grim Betrayal can get creatures back from graveyards that are put there from anywhere this turn back into play under your control, and they can do that as many times as you need to, throughout the game. But I mean, this game's gonna be over regardless. Blooming Dawn can make you an infinite number of 1/1 spirits, and Roaring Blades can just dish out an infinite number of damage to any number of permanents that you want. Again, yeah, there's a reason why Cryptic Dreams is so incredibly powerful, especially when paired with one of these incredibly proliferating creatures. And again, Pollen Bright Druid is especially effective because, again, we have that option of either a counter or proliferating. So, yeah, I mean, again, we were going infinite. We can also just make our creatures infinitely large with this. That being said, we still do have 2 other creatures that can help us with proliferating, and one again can go infinite with Kiora's Dambreaker. It again has that exact same ETB when it enters the battlefield, proliferate. And actually at 6 mana, this might seem like it's just, inherently worse than the other ones. That being said, there is a card that actually works with this one better than the others, and we'll get to that here in a bit. Now, another creature that can help us out, not in an infinite way, but still in a very fantastically powerful way, is Flux Channeler. It says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. We definitely don't have to go infinite to win with this deck. Just by having this in play, whenever we cast any non-creature spell, again, we can either get a divinity counter or an indestructibility counter, whatever kind of counter on our Myojin, and essentially just keep utilizing their abilities again and again and again. So yeah, Flux Channeler is an incredibly potent card in this deck as well. And of course, we're also running other kinds of proliferate effects with some one-off effects like Contentious Plan, Steady Progress, and Tezzeret's Gambit. Contentious Plan is going to draw us 1 card, Steady Progress is as well but instant speed, and Tezzeret's Gambit is going to draw us 2 cards. On top of, again, proliferating, which is why these are so important. Next up, there's Smell Fear, which has Proliferate. Target creature you control fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. And of course, with our Myojin being indestructible, well, it's going to be an easy fight for them. Moving on, Unbound Potential says choose 1, play +1 counter of each of up to 2 target creatures, or proliferate. The vast majority of the time, of course, we're going to be choosing that proliferate, but yeah, we might actually entwine this in a certain point, if we need to. But speaking of options, there's Plain Wide Celebration, which says choose 4, you may choose the same mode more than once. Create a 2/2 citizen creature token that's all colors, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, proliferate, you gain 4 life. Again, this normally would cost 7, but with our commander this costs 5, and yeah, proliferating 4 times for just 5 mana is incredible once we're set up correctly. And of course, with this being flexible to help us get permanents back from our graveyard is an incredible thing as well. Finally though, 2 other cards that actually help us out in a somewhat different way are Contractual Safeguard and Daring Fiend Bonder. Contractual Safeguard is an instant that has addendum, so if you cast it during your main phase, you get a shield counter on a creature you control. And again, a shield counter means that if you dealt damage or destroyed, you remove that shield counter from it instead. It says choose a kind of counter on a creature you control, put a counter of that kind on each other creature you control. This works very well, especially with our newer Myojin. Again, they have indestructibility counters, so we can just choose one of them and get that on every single other creature, including our commander. And yeah, it just gives those Myojin even more activations for their abilities. Speaking of which, there's Daring Fiend Bonder, which has pay 1 and a black, exile it from your graveyard, put an indestructible counter on target creature, activate this ability only anytime you cast a sorcery. So when this is in our graveyard, this just basically, hey, pay 2 mana, get an indestructibility counter again on one of our newer Myojins, which is a fantastic way to get another activation from one of them, or again, if we want to put that on Jodah to, protect it, we can. But how are we actually going to get to all these awesome cards? First up, let's talk about cards like Eureka Moment and Urban Evolution. At instant speed, Eureka Moment's going to have us draw 2 cards and get a land from our hand into play. Whereas Urban Evolution's going to have us draw 3 cards and play an additional land this turn. So each of these are fantastic ways to not only draw cards, but also to help us ramp as well. Next up, Painful Truce is a very interesting card in this deck. It has Converge, you draw X cards and you lose X life for X the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. So in the vast majority of decks out there, this can basically be draw 3, lose 3, which is a fantastic card, but with this one, we've got even more flexibility. Because again, with Jodah, we can actually pay more mana for this card, which, normally would be a bad thing, but with this one, by paying Wooburg for it, we draw 5, lose 5. And again, 1 card for 1 life is a deal I'll make any day of the week in Commander. Regardless, next up there's Overflowing Insight, which is going to draw 7 cards, Biomantic Mastery, which is going to draw us a card for each creature target player controls, then draw a card for each creature another target player controls, and then Emergency Powers can help us out by saying each player shovels their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards, exile Emergency Powers. And if we cast it during our main phase, we can put a permanent card converted mana cost 7 or less from our hand onto the battlefield. Regardless, again, although these massive draw spells do have a massive price at 7 mana apiece, again, with our commander, we can just spend 5 mana to do so. Speaking of which, again, we've got some more ultimatums in this deck with Inspired Ultimatum and Genesis Ultimatum. Inspired's going to have target player gain 5 life, it's going to deal 5 damage to any target, and we draw 5 cards. And then Genesis Ultimatum says look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield and you rest in your hand, exile Genesis Ultimatum. So this can help us actually cheat things out. Again, be careful, do not do that with the Myojin if you want to get those counters on them, because again, they only get that if you actually cast them when they enter the battlefield. That being said, this actually can help us ramp. Again, if you hit any lands, those are just going to be going into play, which is fantastic. Now, drawing cards to get to our most powerful effects in this deck is great, but sometimes we need to be a bit more specific. So we're also going to be running a good amount of tutors in this deck with cards like Diabolical Tutor and Razguest Right. Diabolical Tutor is going to get us any card into our hand. Razguest Right is the exact same thing, or we can cycle it away for a black. So if we want to go get a specific Myojin, including Cryptic Dreams, which is part of our combo, or maybe the other end of our combo with one of our proliferate creatures, we can. Speaking of which, there's Gerard's Orders, which says search your library for the 2 creature cards and reveal them, put one in your hand, the other in your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Now, keep in mind, getting a creature card into our graveyard can help us out in multiple ways. First up, if we already have Grim Betrayal in play with that indestructibility counter on it, we can utilize that counter to get whatever creature we put in our graveyard into play for free. But most of the time, we might just go get Daring Fiend Bonder and put it right into our graveyard, so again, we can utilize it to get an indestructibility counter either on our commander or again on one of our new Myojin. But speaking of our graveyard, there's Mythos of Brokos, which says if blue-black was spent to cast this spell, search your life for a card, put that card into your graveyard, then shuffle your library, and return the 2 permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. So this can help us out in a lot of situations. And speaking of that, next up there's Bring to Light, which says converge, search your life for a creature, instant, or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast Bring to Light, exile that card, then shuffle your library. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So this one can actually tutor out a lot of our proliferate ETB creatures, so if we need that part of the combo, this can just basically go get them right away. Or if we actually need to tutor out another tutor for something else, we can. Moving on, there's Signal the Clans, which says search your library for 3 creature cards, reveal them. If you reveal 3 cards with different names, choose one of them at random and put that card in your hand, shuffle the rest in your library. So again, if we're looking for one of those proliferate creatures, again, we've got a couple of them to choose from, so we're going to be hitting at least one of them with this. Or, if we just want to get a powerful Myojin, great, just pick, 3 powerful Myojin and you're going to get one of them. Or we can be a bit more specific on that Myojin with Fierce Empath that has, when it enters the battlefield, you may search your life for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or greater, reveal it, put in your hand, then shuffle your library. Of course, all the Myojin cost 6 or greater, and so does Kiora's Dambreaker, again, that one creature that has the ETB that proliferates. That also costs 6 mana, and that you might think is worse, but again, having an extra tutor for that can be huge. But now that we've talked about our plans, well, let's talk about some ways to throw a massive wrench into our opponent's plans. So first up, let's talk about 2 more ultimatums with Cruel Ultimatum and Violent Ultimatum. Cruel Ultimatum says target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, then loses 5 life. You return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, draw 3 cards, then gain 5 life. So this is a massive swing that really hurts an opponent and can really help us out. Whereas Violent Ultimatum is very simple, destroy 3 target permanents, but yeah, that can be an incredible effect. Next up, we've got some very one-sided board-wise with cards like Dune Blast, Ingarrick's Wake, and Volcanic Vision. Dune Blast says choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. So yeah, we're going to choose Jodah, and we're going to get rid of everything else on the board, and our Myojin will be fine. Speaking of which, there's Ingarrick's Wake, which says draw creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. And again, while this usually would cost 9 mana, with Jodah it just costs 5. And then Volcanic Vision says return target instant sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Volcanic Vision deals damage equal to that card's mana value to each creature your opponents control, exile Volcanic Vision. So this is a great way for us to get back one of our massive spells and yeah, wipe out our opponent's creatures. Again, we've got a lot of instant sorceries that have a very high converted mana cost. And finally, we're also going to be running some more target removal with cards like Beast Within, Crush Contraband, and Sylvan Reclamation. Beast Within is going to destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Crush Contraband says choose one or both, exile target artifact, exile target enchantment. And then Sylvan Reclamation essentially is the exact same thing, exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments, or we can basic land cycle it away for 2. But now that we've gone through every single non-land card in this deck, let's move on to the lands. First up, we've got Command Tower, which can tap for any of our colors, Exotic Orchard, which you usually can, and Path of Ancestry, which can tap for any of our colors, but enters battlefield tapped. Moving on, there's Ash Barrens, which we can basically cycle it away for 1, and Evolving Wilds and Timberwolf Expanse, both of which do the exact same thing, tap, sacrifice them, get a basic land into play tapped. Moving on, we've also got the 5 new fetch lands from Streets of New Capenna, which essentially are going to be sacrificed. We get 1 of 3 basics, and they come into play tapped, and we gain 1 life. Next up, we also have some lands that can actually help ramp us when we sacrifice them with Crows and Verge, Myriad Landscape, and Blighted Woodland. And finally, the rest of our mana base is very straightforward with forests, islands, swamps, plains, and mountains. But now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every single card in this deck outside of the 5 old Myojin, which include Cleansing Fire, Night's Reach, Life's Web, Infinite Rage, and Seeing Winds, are less than $1. So even though those 5 Myojin themselves are $27.20 altogether, the rest of the deck is incredibly budget friendly, and our entire cost is just $57.07. So the rest of the deck outside of those Myojin is just $30 itself. And keep in mind that that cost even actually includes the cost of basic lands at 10 cents a piece. So if you already have those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And speaking of potential savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.